So in this video, we're going to learn how to use the Senza REST API, specifically the group messaging API, to send emergency alerts. If you run a broadcast TV platform, you may actually be required by the government to be able to send broadcast messages to your viewers in the event that there's some sort of emergency, like a zombie apocalypse or who knows what. So in this case, we're going to walk through a bit about how that works. So in the reference section of the documentation, there's a page all about emergency alerts that walks through a little bit about how the API works. It's actually very lightweight. We have this little class in the client library called the message manager that lets you register for groups. This is just an array of one and more strings. In our example, we're going to use state codes, but these could be anything that you want. Then we have a REST API that can send a message, which can be a string or a JSON object, to one or more groups. And then there's a very simple callback in the message manager where if you receive a message, it will call that function. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We do have some interactive API explorers on in the documentation under API reference. The way it's going to work is first we need to get an auth token, and then once we have an auth token, then we can call the API. Now, in order to get an auth token, we're going to need to do a one-time step where we, in the portal, we want to click on API keys, and that's going to take us to a page where we can manage the API keys, which here is just called applications in the platform. So if I go ahead and create an application here, we're going to use that for the tutorial. So I'm going to call it zombies, and we are going to use that in the Senza demo tutorial, Senza demo tenant. And we need to be able to use the hyperscale messages send direct permission. Let's move. No, actually, we want send group because we have two APIs, one for group messaging and one for direct messaging to one device. Doesn't matter. We can just create an API key that'll work for both of those. So now I'm going to go ahead and create the application. That takes just a moment. And in a second, you'll see that I have a client ID, which I'm going to go ahead and copy. And so that's my client ID. And then I've got a client secret, which I can view and I can also copy. So I'm going to make a note of that, and then we're going to use it in a moment. So we're all done here. I can close that. And if I go here, what I can do is I can take my client ID and my client secret and paste them in here. And then when I say try it, it's going to give me an auth token. So that'll just take a second. Also known as an access token. So I'm going to copy that. That's a pretty long string. And if I go here to the other page, in this section here where it says authorization, note that the word bearer and then a space has to appear in front of the access token. So that's going to look like that. And then if I need to get my tenant ID, which is this. And then if I add a string like that, I'm not really going to receive the message, but this is just to show that it works. If I go ahead and do that, it'll say OK. So next, let's start with a demo. If I go to the Senza simulator, I can go ahead and select the Zombies app down at the end. This is fundamentally just a clone of the Banner app that plays a video, and it'll work either if you're in foreground mode or background mode. But what I can do right now is I can bring up this little dashboard here that lets me send a message. And if I just click that button, then it's going to pop up a little alert that says, well, I hope it will. There we go. So zombie alert, you'll see I was able to choose the icon and the text and the color, as well as what states I want to send it to. In this case, this is just a zombie pandemic and I'm sending it to every state, but in this case, I've registered for alerts in the New York area. I could also change this to a different one, like tsunami alert, head for the hills. And you know, if there was a real tsunami, we would want to have a pleasing background color, so we can go ahead and put that in. And then if I do send message, then you'll see we have a different custom alert. I also want to show you another program called Rapid API. This is a really cool program that's a Mac native program, very similar to Postman, and but it's just really more slick than that. So if I put in my client ID and put in my client secret, then it has this really handy way that you don't have to do all this copying and pasting, because you can copy and paste the access token by reference, where you say copy as response body dynamic value, like that. And then if you go over here in the headers of the other request, you can paste it right there, so that now when I call the API, I don't have to copy and paste it every time. Isn't that handy? So there's that. So let's go ahead and have a look at the code in the zombies sample code, which you can check out from our GitHub repository. There's a config where you need to put in your client ID and your client secret right here. It's a Node.js app and two little client apps, one that represents the what's on the TV, and the other one the dashboard. So let's look at the main body of the app first and see what's going on here. So this has a REST API endpoint that accepts a post message on the endpoint, which is message, where it prints it to the console, and then it calls the send group message function here. Now you'll notice that we have a get access token function that takes the OAuth block from the config, just this entire thing verbatim, and sends that to get the access token. And when the app starts, we call await get access token, which sets it, and then we also automatically call it again every 6 hours to refresh it, because that's how often it lives for. So in the group message API, that function is going to take a tenant ID, groups, payload, and an event name, and then it's going to go ahead and so it basically sends that object. The body includes groups, payload, and event name. So it sends that to the server. We also have an implementation here of the function that sends a message to an individual device. In that case, instead of the tenant ID, you just need the device ID. and the app receives it in kind of the same way. So the implementation of the dashboard app is pretty simple. Actually, most of the code is in the static HTML. That's just a bunch of checkboxes, really. But when I click on the send message button, it you see when I click on send message, so there we go. What it does is when I call send message, it basically just makes a payload where it gets the icon, gets the title, gets the message, and gets the color. And then together, that's the object that we're going to send when we call the API. So when we send that, it's going to go call this, we're going to call that endpoint. It's going to call that function. The Node app is going to call the Senza REST API. And then over here in our client, this is verbatim almost the same as the banner app, except when it starts up, we call message manager register groups. And we're going to pretend we're in the tri-state area here around New York. And then when I receive a message, I'm going to move to the foreground if I need to. And then I'm going to basically call JSON parse on the event detail payload. That's how I get that JSON object back. I'm going to print that to the console so you can see it. And then I just use the values from the payload where I show the banner, I set the icon, set the title, set the message, and set the background color. And that is it. That's what you get. So that's a quick tour of how you can use the device messaging API. Asteroid incoming. It looks like a meatball. So that's how it works. Watch out for zombies. Thanks, everybody.